Okay, so today we're going deep on something pretty interesting.
Uh-oh.
Right now, I'm turning a YouTube video into an AI-generated podcast.
So the key insight here is that
Here, I'm turning a website into an AI-generated podcast.
We've dug into the sources, looked at the connections.
And here, I'm turning my Q1 performance review into an AI-generated podcast.
This deep dive should offer some really concrete insights.
This is kind of why I'm taking a break from the podcasting world. I was a podcast producer for many years at The Verge, and frankly, pivoted to video because I wanted to feel more creatively fulfilled. Now basically everything's a podcast. And it's possible that creators will be soon battling for listeners' time with stuff anyone can make with a click of a button. With Google's NotebookLM tool, it's doing exactly that. Its audio overview feature, which is eerily impressive, is not just two robot voices going back and forth, it's breaking down literally any form of text, audio, or link that you upload, adding metaphors, puns, even casual banter to help you better understand any topic.
Apple can't charge commissions outside the App Store. That feels huge.
Oh, it's potentially massive.
There's even ums and filler words in there too.
Isn't it interesting how things come full circle, you know?
Yeah. As a former podcast creator, I obviously feel like this waters down the art of the craft. It's almost a parody of podcasting, but I'm kind of obsessed with it. So let's sit down, test this stuff out, and figure out how well it actually works, especially compared to the human-made podcasts, which I can't believe is actually a phrase I have to use now.
Okay, let's unpack this.
All right, so buckle up.
Let's dig into some of these.
It makes you wonder.
So there's sometimes bodies of text that I just don't want to read for one reason or another. I mentioned earlier I turned my job performance review into an audio overview. I didn't want to read that. It's hard to handle criticism, but maybe it's easier in audio form.
And it also suggested he could further hone his shooting and scripting skills, maybe by shadowing more experienced team members.
Never mind, no it isn't. Actually, I think a great example here is stereo instructions. I uploaded a manual of the Outlaw RR2160 MK2 stereo receiver to NotebookLM. Not exactly light reading.
The PC USB port we saw on the selector.
That's the one. Turns the RR2160 MKII into an external sound card for your computer. The manual mentions needing a driver for Windows, which is pretty common.
Okay.
This was actually pretty helpful overall to get all this information conveyed to me in a casual way. It organizes topics and segments the way a real podcast would. But immediately upon listening to these things, you realize it's not necessarily a time saver, even though sometimes it tries to say it is.
Let's face it, tech reviews, they can be a real time suck.
They really can.
We are here to make sure you're in the loop without spending hours and hours.
Yeah, glued to your screen.
What you just heard is an audio overview of The Verge's iPhone 16 Pro review video, which is 22 minutes. And it turned it into a 20-minute podcast. Saved me 2 minutes. The podcast space is dependent on competing for your time. And the more time you spend listening to stereo instructions, the less time you'll spend listening to, like, NPR. But this relaxed format is actually by design. I talked to the director of product at NotebookLM, Simon Tokumine, about what went into making audio overviews. And the team really wanted to make it sound like an unscripted conversation.
We'd initially put together these podcasts that were very efficient with information. Googlers loved those. They were like, this is great. I can optimize my use of time and all this kind of stuff. And it felt the opposite to what I was expecting. And it was only when we started to actually, share what we were building with others and get feedback from people who aren't necessarily obsessed with, making every second of their day as efficient as possible, but are more into, kind of leaning back and listening in and just kind of, going with a wave of information, that we realized there were two different populations we were building for here. And the population we were building for was not necessarily Googlers.
To achieve that personality-driven podcast equality, NotebookLM relied on Gemini 2.5 Pro with meta-prompting, agentic workflows to create scripts for the host to follow, and interestingly, a bunch of recordings of two real people sitting in a room together pretending to be on a podcast.
Yeah, it's actually very challenging to encourage a sort of natural, really natural sounding dialogue. Like, you can't script it. It's finding the right people and then getting them into a an ad-libby, conversational sort of frame of mind and environment where they would just go and talk about things that are interesting to them. And it's really a lot of, I think, what you hear in audio reviews is because of the sort of the natural chemistry that, our voice talents had in the studio when we were recording their voices.
The manual, kind of funny, says read it first.
Goes against the outlaw name, maybe.
Maybe.
I continue to be impressed with these little moments within overviews. Like this bit in the podcast I made from a Spanish paella recipe.
They're like little sponges soaking up all that delicious broth.
So you're not aiming for like a creamy risotto texture here.
No, not at all.
You want those distinct grains of rice that are bursting with flavor.
The recipe I gave it doesn't mention risotto at all. So the AI is actually using some external information from Gemini and contextualizing it into the podcast, which adds a lot for understanding a subject. It's constantly making metaphors to help you understand. Sometimes too much.
Think of it like learning to drive. Think of it like packing for a backpacking trip.
Think of it like taking a breath in the middle of that constant stream of information we all get.
Good way to put it.
What I found in my testing is that you really get more out of this product by adding a bunch of material into your notebook, rather than generating a podcast from one piece of text. And this tool called Discover finds the sources for you across the web, so you can digest a bigger topic in cases where you might not even know where to start. See, this is a better way of doing it. Here at The Verge, our first step to making a podcast is actually making a Google Doc, which typically has a bunch of questions, notes, and other context for our hosts. So I wanted to try this experiment where I take these production documents and run it through NotebookLM to see how well Audio Overviews works compared to our own artisanal productions. The first I tried is an outline for an episode of Decoder with Nilay Patel, all about EV adoption. You can see here some topics, recent stories, and questions. And here's a clip of what the audio overview version sounds like.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're hitting the road, but not in the usual gas guzzler,
Mm-hmm. I sent the result to Decoder producers Kate Cox and Nick Stat, who were impressed with the surface level results, but didn't think it really translated to how a producer would do it.
The words were good and the words were in sentences, but they didn't say anything.
I could hear them following through the questions and the different points. And we put in some facts and figures, some statistics, things like that. It was kind of running down the list, hitting all of them, but it wasn't making the leap from those things that we were using kind of as prompts and then actually saying something meaningful like a human would.
I mean, it sounded like what it was, which was a computer pretending to be NPR voice.
And all of these factors, the changing market, the car maker strategies, the politics, the price tag, the economic headwinds, they're all feeding into this feeling of anxiety of uncertainty about the EV future.
The thing I kept coming back to was how eager the voices were to make puns.
A topic that's, sparking debate, driving innovation, and maybe even causing a little range anxiety, pun intended.
It was actually something that kind of took me out of it because no normal human being would ever make that amount of puns unless they were actively trying to do that.
I tried the same thing with our other show, The Vergecast, which mostly uses a rundown of links to outline the show.
Today, we're tackling a couple of really significant shifts happening in the tech world. We're going to unpack the immediate and, the potential long-term fallout from the new tariffs, particularly those enacted recently.
Right, the Trump administration ones.
Exactly. And then we'll zoom into the breakneck speed of artificial intelligence and some other interesting tech news that's been buzzing around.
I shared those results with Vergecast co-host David Pierce, who compiles the rundown each week. He was a little more forgiving, but had similar criticisms.
It's like 20 minutes of them starting and never finishing conversations. So I kept being impressed with you've actually pulled out the nugget of this story that is the most interesting thing. We had this story from The Information about what's going on inside of Apple as they try to rectify AI Siri. And these AI hosts found the two most interesting things from that story and pulled them out.
Apparently there were internal debates within the team about using smaller AI models, ones that could run directly on your device.
On-device AI, that's a big trend.
Yeah, and it sounds like Craig Federighi even put together his own dedicated team to work on this specifically.
Interesting internal dynamics.
And I was very impressed with that. And then, we spent 15 minutes talking about sort of the bigger picture story and what's really going on here and how we understand how this fits into, and they just moved on. And it's this is the beginning of a good podcast, but you forgot to make the good podcast.
One major flag from this was how it read the format of the document, which led to some factually incorrect information.
So one of the news stories from this episode was that Toby Lutka, the CEO of Shopify, had put out this big thing basically saying that
Said they won't be making new hires unless they can prove that AI can't do the job.
Wow, that's direct.
Isn't it?
And underneath that, indented, is a link to a study that said most people don't trust AI or the people in charge of it. The AI narrator then ascribed that whole opinion about not trusting AI or the people in charge of it to Tobi Lütke, the CEO of Shopify, which is just flatly wrong.
He also pointed out that, a lot of people don't really trust AI.
That's a really significant perspective from a major tech leader.
This kind of misinterpretation happened a few times. I've generated audio overviews of my own reporting notes, and the host cited fictional quotes from my sources that were never in the document. AI hallucination is certainly something to look out for, even when you're just using it as a study guide.
So this doesn't worry you about the state of podcasting at all?
No. If I can't do better than this, it should have my job. Like, truly, if someone listens to this and is like, this is just as good as the Vergecast, tell Nilay so he can fire me. Like, it's that simple.
So right now, I agree. This stuff isn't that competitive to what human beings have to offer in the podcast world. But I have found there is a really interesting feature in audio overviews that you wouldn't necessarily get with a podcast from real people. Let me show you this beta feature called Interactive Mode. With this feature, you can actually interrupt the podcast and ask the host a question whenever you need a clarification or want to focus on a certain subject.
Well, I think it really speaks to the power of choosing the right ingredients and letting them shine. Whoa, did someone just break the fourth wall? Let's hear it.
I don't have chicken or honey. Is there a good replacement for that in this recipe?
That's a great question. Let's unpack this.
Yeah, that throws a little wrench in the works, doesn't it?
Okay, so for the chicken, pretty much any protein would work.
Right, you could totally do fish, like maybe a nice flaby white fish.
Exactly, or even tofu if you're looking for a vegetarian option.
Oh, that's a good call. Tofu would soak up that lemon flavor nicely.
You can also just ask it random questions, which it sometimes tries to answer.
What's your favorite McDonald's order?
Well, that's certainly a change of pace.
It is. I haven't thought about my go-to McDonald's order in ages.
It's funny how those things stick with you, though.
They do. I think back in the day, I was always a fan of a McDouble. Simple but satisfying.
A classic choice. For me, I'd probably have to say a quarter pounder with cheese.
Ooh, a solid pick. See, now we're taking a little detour. Okay, but pivoting back.
To the world of tariffs.
Then it continues on with the rest of the episode. Simon told me that though this isn't something they expected users to be doing, its freedom to roleplay is part of what enables us to have a more realistic discussion.
I think historically, voice assistants across the globe, not just Google's, but every others, have shied away from that and almost like had that locked out of their general behavior, kind of by design. We made an intentional choice to actually not do that. What we found is by giving the models more freedom to role play as one of these hosts, they're able to just perform in a much more convincing way.
I also want to point out here how it tackles misinformation. I went back to that Vergecast bit about the Shopify CEO that it got wrong to offer a correction.
And he also touched on the public's trust or lack thereof in AI.
Which is a huge factor for widespread adoption.
Adobe is...
Oh, go for it.
Actually, he wasn't the one who commented on people's distrust of companies using AI. That was just a separate article not attributed to the Shopify CEO.
Oh, you are absolutely right. Thanks for catching that.
My mistake. We appreciate the clarification.
It seems that the point about most Americans not trusting AI,
or the people in charge of it, came from a separate piece.
Thanks for keeping us honest and on point.
Okay, so continuing on with the AI news.
But some things it refused to be corrected about, like when it misgendered Nilay in the iPhone review.
Okay, so Nelly Patel from The Verge reviewed this, so...
Exactly, and she brings a really interesting perspective, doesn't she?
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
The host is Nilay Patel, and his pronouns are he, him.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
You know, it's easy to make assumptions.
Based on what we've seen and heard?
But actually, Nelly Patel uses she, her pronouns.
Thanks for pointing that out. It's good to be accurate.
Absolutely. Thanks for keeping us on our toes.
So getting back to Neely's review.
Google says it has several guardrails to address misinformation, primarily by keeping the AI's responses solely based on the documents that you upload, but emphasizes that audio overviews may contain inaccuracies or glitches, and that interactive mode is in ongoing development. It's hard to tell what information Gemini is grabbing to contextualize and what information it's grabbing from your documents, so I'd always recommend double checking within your source material. As accessible as this is, and its potential to get even smarter, Is this going to replace a major portion of the podcast industry? Or is it just an AI fad? To get some insight, I met with Nicholas Kwa, a podcast critic at Vulture, who has been reporting on the fast-moving podcast industry for over a decade.
I think about this in parallel to broader conversations that we're having about the way artificial intelligence is going to reshape the labor market, right? So the equivalent of that in the audio business, as exemplified by the NotebookLM example that you sent me, is unfortunately the public radio report.
Yeah.
Which is to say, a form that is so formulaic that it seems to be pretty easily simulated, right?
Traffic, weather, local news, radio DJs are already being replaced by something like this. Anecdotally, I've heard how much media companies are looking into where they can replace some production with artificial intelligence. Look at this AI version of me I was very easily able to make with a podcast editing software called Descript. And there are other services like this entering the space. Microsoft announced Copilot Podcasts, which promises it will pretty much do the same thing. But the way NotebookLM is currently set up, it's not necessarily competing with anything actual people are making. If you're compiling a bunch of your own research, notes, something super regional like town hall meetings, this is just an incredibly easy way to turn that stuff into digestible audio, if it's accurate. Kind of the point of these audio overviews is that they're tailored to one listener at a time, not necessarily a broader audience that podcasts try to attract. I can imagine someone trying to monetize these by putting a bunch of generated podcasts into an RSS feed, splicing in some ads. But with how easy it is for anyone to make these themselves, I'm not sure there's much of a business there. And if the spam of AI images over the past few years has taught me anything, it's that the more artificial stuff being produced into the world, the more we appreciate the stuff made by actual human beings.
Immediately, like, my brain goes to the sort of LinkedIn bro that goes like, yeah, man, as long as it gives me the information I want, like, books don't matter, Moby Dick don't matter, like I don't give a shit. But, you know, there are some people on this planet who kind of feel like stuff like this does matter, right? Like, what it means to listen to something that comes from a human being, being able to see a piece of media or information not just as a unit commodity. Unfortunately, we do kind of live in a system which largely rewards the more utilitarian version of that universe, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
After listening to a bunch of this stuff, I'm also thinking there may be a sort of hybrid situation where AI-generated podcasts and human-made podcasts can inform each other. I'm already noticing a bunch of podcasting tropes in NotebookLM that I will be avoiding in my own productions. Maybe we as a society will make better and more thoughtful art because of what we hear from artificial content. Maybe it can be a muse. I don't know. Sometimes listening to two strangers talking about something so familiar to you can be eye-opening.
So the review starts off really positive.
Oh, good.
Andru's meeting expectations in his role.
Great.
Which is like awesome.
Yeah.
He really seems to have like hit the ground running on the video team.
Okay.
Bringing fresh ideas to projects.
I see.
Like the Untitled Gadget Show.
Right.
Remember that crazy CES coverage?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the areas for growth section.
Okay.
One thing that stood out to me was the feedback about Andru getting super focused on specific ideas.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently he missed a couple of opportunities to contribute.
Really?
Because he was so locked in on one particular project.
I see.
He could benefit from taking a step back sometimes.
Okay.
And considering the bigger picture,
Right.
it's not about abandoning his passions,
No.
but learning how to align them with the team's goals and priorities.
I got it.
How does a company like The Verge
Right.
foster individual growth while staying ahead of the curve?
Totally.
How do they strike that balance between creative freedom and data-driven decision-making?
Those are great questions, and maybe something for you listening to think about.
Yeah.
How does this compare to performance evaluations in your own field?
Right.
Do you see any parallels?
I love it.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
Hey, where can you find all this information to read more?
Oh, hey again. That's a fantastic follow-up.
Absolutely. We've been pulling information from several articles on The Verge.
Yeah, The Verge has really been tracking NotebookLM's development.
If you head over to their website and search for NotebookLM,
You should find all the articles we're referencing today.